Hey everybody, Bridget Lynn Dolgoff, Conscious of Economics and Urban Farm Project. Ooh. Wow. It's just been kind of a, you know, wild period of life. I spent 3 years working on that house and developing an apothecary so that I could provide a bunch of people, herbal medicine in my community. And, it was a dump when I moved in. And then they wanted to sell it because, I guess it looked nice enough. So they gave me a 30-day eviction. And yeah, so anyway, karma is a biatch. And I hope they get everything they deserve in the process. So anyway, I wanted to talk today about duality. And, like the Buddha always kind of said that suffering, that all suffering, basically comes from the mind. And it comes from expectation that things should be one way and they're not that way. So then, we have intense suffering, woe's me, my reality is a lie. And, they sell us a lot of these, fairy tales and stories. And I think it's interesting, and there are a lot of people who have commented on this before, that, most of the movies that are produced out of Hollywood, that govern Americans and their thinking, are the hero's journey, kind of stuff, where you, go out on your journey. And I got to pick up speed so I don't get ran over. It's a fast highway. You go on these journeys, you leave your family and you go out and you're on your hero's journey, and then you come back and everybody's like, oh. And just like the whole hero mindset, there's like one savior, one whatever. And that if you do the right thing, eventually the right things will happen to you, blah, blah, blah. And kind of whatever other storyline that people have been sold. I think women in America, by far, have been fed the fairy tale syndrome. In such an extreme way. I think I've talked about this before when I had radio, but when I was doing my radio show gig. But, I'd like to point out that the story of Snow White, where the prince finds a dead body and kisses it, there's a word for that. It's called necrophilia, where you're, having, romantic relations with a dead body. So, yeah, not normal at all, okay? And you could dive down into the levels of psychology. Women feel like they're asleep until they meet the right one. And the other thing, too, is early in life, I had some really good mentors. I had this one mentor that we would meet and have pints, in my early 20s when he was a professor at Gonzaga University, which was a law school up in Washington State. And I was up there for a while studying with a Lakota Sioux medicine woman. And he was kind of, knew her and stuff, and I didn't know anybody, so we would go out and have pints and just talk about, psychological type thinking processes. And one day he said to me, you have fairy tale syndrome. And I had no idea what that meant, but we had this really long discussion, and he was right. I think most women in America have it. And then the fairy tale never really turns out to be a fairy tale. It always turns out to be kind of a nightmare. But the bottom line is did you do a background check on that prince, right? Did you investigate his family? Did you see if he has a job, what his health conditions are? How many women he's married before? No, because you just got onto the white horse and rode off into the sunset, and you had no idea what the sunset was or where the sunset was headed. And then then you're mad. Then you're mad when it doesn't work out, and retaliatory, when it was just your false belief systems all along. And that's really what, I look at the suffering is the false belief systems, like the long-term, Par and I talk a lot about this in the past on my radio show, and now we're doing a podcast on my Substack. So it's uncos.substack.com. And our podcast is the Bucket of Spicy Fried Chicken podcast. But we talk about this, like, how many hundreds, maybe even thousands of years that the public, the slave parts of the public have been indoctrinated into MK Ultra predictive programming, and not really capable of critical thinking. And Rudolf Steiner talks about this period as the 5th post-Atlantean epoch. And he talks about how that started from 1410 and it'll go on to 3572. And that this is the period where the human being develops the ability to think, develops intellect, which is critical thinking. And then we'll move into, and it's an individualized period where it's individualistic, where you are developing it on an individual way. And then after 3572, then we'll move into a collective thing. And I think it's interesting that people think like, I don't really believe that we're going to be saved from whatever type of experience that, we're having here. Because it seems like to me, we still need to undergo a lot of, not evolution, but abilities, to use the things that we actually have. Anyway, it's very interesting. I think about this a lot. So let's talk about duality, because I think duality is the core of expectation, and understanding duality kind of is the key to setting yourself free. And setting yourself free isn't manifesting your reality or, getting your $1 million home or being able to shop till you drop or, do any of those kinds of things. It's about you becoming a spiritualized human on earth. And that's kind of creating heaven on earth, because when you can make different decisions, then you change the collective. And I may not be around, to be honest. I may not be around, to be honest, at all when, things change, but I'm willing to hold the line in what I believe to be right. So, best explanation that I've ever heard about duality was probably when I was around, I think I was at a lecture, I'd say like 24, somewhere in there. Okay, so I'm going to be, I am 55, so. Okay, so, and the person, they gave the explanation, I have to look both ways so I don't get run over, connecting onto another highway. The best explanation that I've ever heard was from this person, and it took me years to kind of understand what he was saying. But that's part of planting a seed, right? I have to fix the soil. Somebody can put the seed in, then I have to restore the soil. I have to water it. I have to pay attention to it until it decides to germinate and grow. And what direction am I going to take it in, really? So he was saying that, you're looking down a long hall, and there's different rooms off this hall, and at the end of the hall there's this beautiful painting. But the door on this side of the painting is open, and the sun is shining through that window, and it's casting a shadow onto the painting. And the person in duality would say, wow, that picture would look a whole lot better if that door was shut and that light wasn't casting a shadow on it. The person in non-duality would say, it's perfect no matter what. And so the person that has the expectation, who is causing victimization and victimhood and suffering by their mind theater or their thought principles, are not seeing that what it is what it is, and that the accepting and surrendering to the what is what it is, and that at that moment in time there is no better and there is no worse. It just is. And I think a lot of people sometimes ask me, like how I've gotten through like all the stuff that I've gotten through. And if I would have, gone the party line and the, mind control factor, I probably would have been able to make a lot of money. But that's not the system that I wanted to live in. I wanted to know myself, free myself, on every level possible in this experience. So that wasn't going to work. So, in a lot of the cases, because of the choices I've made, I've actually been forced to live with a lot less. But I think it was the right thing to do. Because you can't fight the system and try to hold on to stuff that is in the system, because the system will fight you back and take it away. And then you'll be really upset, because then you'll think like, they took all my money. Well, it wasn't your money anyway, because you didn't create it, they did. And every time I think about money these days, I always just remind myself that, like I can think that I'm making money and that, blah, 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 but it's not my money, because this isn't really the world that I created, okay? This is a world that has been created for whatever reason you want to believe in. So the money is not my money, even if it's in my bank account, because it's just some, bull caca thing that's another derivative of the, thought principles and the MK Ultra, mind control experience, that you're actually, going to run this long gauntlet of marathon in this world and end up with anything. You come in with nothing and you're going to leave with nothing. But it's what you do in the middle, I think. That's kind of like my thoughts. It's what you do in the middle of it all. So anyway, bottom line is that if you're suffering, maybe it's because you're in kind of a dualistic type thinking, and you believe that you're owed something, or that you're the right person, or you've done the right thing, or whatever mamby-pamby kind of thinking that you have. And obviously, if you're in suffering, you have to realize that all those belief systems were not correct, and that you're doing yourself an injustice and harming yourself. So how do you look at your life and just accept what is? Get up in the morning, no matter how hard it is, or how you feel, or whatever else, and you just launch yourself back into it, because you're here. And you're not here to get anything or acquire anything. You're here to hone yourself, hone your being. And only you can do that. And nothing is going to give you that. I remember Eckhart Tolle, I was listening to this lecture by Eckhart Tolle. And you guys can look into Eckhart Tolle and all this other stuff. And he really did a good job of freeing himself. He was living on like a, excuse me, I'm going to sneeze. Excuse me. He was living on a park, well, he was getting his doctorate in math. And then he started noticing, like people talk to themselves, and he started to realize like people were actually crazy. All right. People in the university setting, kind of had gone mad. And he thought, well, like I don't want that to happen to me, like I don't want to end up going mad. I don't want to go nutso off the deep end. I have to turn around, I have to go back. And so anyway, he finishes his degree, and then he gets a tenure. He gets a tenure, I think at Columbia University or someplace like that. But there's this big park not close to the college. And he, after a period of time, just goes mental. And he goes to the park bench, and he never leaves it. He actually didn't leave the park bench. And I can't remember how long that he was doing it. But anyway, bottom line is that he was on the park bench for a long time. And then somebody gave him like a lotto ticket or something, a scratch off. And he said, okay, if I win money on this scratch off, then I will go back into the world and I will kind of teach what I've learned from fully letting go of having a house, having this, having that, making money, having a career. And I will teach, it. So anyway, he scratched it off and he won $1,000. So he went back into the system. But, and then he wrote, I think, The Power of Now. Then he wrote Stillness Speaks and New Earth or something like that. And he said that, he was down in Hollywood and he was doing kind of a talk. And there were some Hollywood stars and stuff there. And he said, he was kind of taken aback a bit because these stars were basically coming up to him and saying, oh, thanks so much for the presentation, but, we're wealthy now. We've already manifested, our reality, and we're basically at the top of the spiritual food chain at this point, blah, 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 blah. When they hadn't even really learned anything. And just because you have money means absolutely nothing, okay? It means absolutely nothing about anything. It just means that you're more embedded in this crappy world, So anyway, that's it. I've reached my first destination, and I hope you enjoyed the talk. Have a great day. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.